Damon, let me just piggyback on that by telling absolutely everyone who's wondering, even if these block walls come up and it feels like nothing but the worst kind of rejection, the journey is still worth it, just based on what you learn around it and having participated in it. It changes your soul. It's worth it.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and you're about to meet Jack, who lives in Phoenix, Arizona. When Jack was a boy, he was kept separate from his sister, who was biologically related to his parents. While he was interested in reunion, Jack was clearly told his desires were unacceptable, so he held off from searching for years, only to find later that his birth mother was eagerly awaiting his return. On his paternal side, Jack was met with a wall of protection, with the exception of one sister. From a distance, Jack says he's learned more about his paternal family than they probably know about themselves. This is Jack's journey. Jack's given name at birth was John Paul, and his adoptive parents liked the name, so they kept it. John Paul Jones was a highly regarded United States naval captain in the late 1700s, and Jack's adoptive father was a Navy man, so his birth name resonated with his new dad. For clarity, sometimes a guy with the name John will get the nickname Jack. Jack was adopted first. Then, 2 years later, his younger sister was adopted. Their family lived in Altadena, California, near Pasadena, north of the famous Rose Bowl. Then, they moved to Lancaster, where the space shuttle was built and stealth bombers were crafted.
I grew up as a desert rat because that's what it's like up there. So my life as a child was quite lonely, actually, because even though we lived in neighborhoods and so on, mom was very managing and so forth. I didn't have a lot of friends, didn't play a lot of sports, wasn't in a lot of things, so I had kind of lived in my own world. I went to Catholic schools all the way through. The playtime was pretty much alone. If I look back, if I wished for anything, it would have been to have something like Little League from day one, or even some more informal sports with local kids. I think the problem was mom didn't make friends with the parents of any kids who were there. I would run into them in the street and ride bicycles, just kind of like once in a while. But generally, we were pretty much at home.
Did you say that
most
you
of the time.
did or did not have a adopted sibling?
Yes, an adopted sibling. It turns out, by the way, we found out much later, after absolutely everyone had passed away, that she was the daughter of my adoptive dad's sister, which was quite a surprise for all of us.
Interesting. And what was the age difference between the two of you? You didn't
Uh,
play together at all?
2 years difference, and no, it was like we didn't exist. I mean, we had very, very, very little interaction. There was something dark about the whole issue about adopting her. And so she was kept very separate from me, and we were extremely different people. So even though it turns out ultimately she was the biological relation to the parents in the house, and I was not, but we were, just different levels of interests, you name it, intelligence, anything. It was just, there was no reason for us to interact very much.
Fascinating, but I'm interested in the words you used. You said we were kept separate or something along those lines. How did you mean that?
Well, the adoption story for me was my birth father was on his way to becoming a doctor. His father was a cardiac surgeon. My birth mother was a nurse, and therefore I should be thinking about going into medicine, which is weirdly something I was not the least bit interested in. and my sister's adoption story is that she is the daughter of two drop down drunks and needed to be protected from God knows what, but certainly from booze, drugs, and everything else. So she was very, supervised like some religious cult, in the sense of not ever getting into trouble one day.
So, how was it that you guys were kept separate from each other?
Well, that's a good question. I've been thinking about that. I mean, the house was, the houses we lived in were never, mansions, and we were in the same house, but she had her own toys, her own, set of friends from school, and there was something about what we each did in the house. She did, she had girl type chores, I had boy type chores. I took music lessons and so forth. She took ice skating lessons. So they were separate worlds, and I can just gather that she was a big handful. I think this being the daughter of serious alcoholics might have had a lot to do with her hyperactivity and her, inability to have interesting conversations at any age and so on. I mean, a lot of that might, had to do with it. I just know it. And we were not encouraged to do much together. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering, and I won't belabor this, but I was also thinking in the back of my mind, if your parents knew that she was the daughter of their own biology, specifically your father, was there favoritism towards her over you in any way?
The complete opposite. If you were an outsider, you would have envisioned me as the chosen one, and she was the black sheep. In addition, the mother, she favored males at all levels of life, children, adults, and so on, and wasn't close to, women very much. Was very, very very strict and quite, judgmental about women. That's a serious thing with her.
Jack said he had high reverence for his father. He was the role model of a man, proud of his Irish descent. He was a successful engineer who owned a construction company, was a talented athlete in multiple sports, and was a pillar of the community. Jack's dad was well read, spoke with a pleasurable lilt in his voice, and he was loyal to Jack's mother. However, his dad was about as engaged with Jack as men of that era were with kids his age. He wasn't a hugger, showed up to graduations, but wasn't deeply involved in the day-to-day of parenting.
Both parents had a children should be seen and not heard sort of thing. So we didn't get any history. We didn't have any great conversations. Didn't have a lot of great interaction with dad's Irish family. Who, these are people who went to college or had, interesting lives, especially back east. So as far as I'm concerned, I knew how life should be. But on the other hand, mom was in charge of the children. I'm guessing, since based on the love letters that dad sent during World War II, dad barely even knew that I was coming along, and that mom is like 100% in charge of the children. And that's the sad side. Mom was just basically a preacher and a non-communicator. I rarely ever had a question and answer, give and take type of conversation with mom. Mom's entire life was save money, don't get into trouble, and a very, very long list of things not to do, basically on her fears and the like.
Jack told me he relates to movie characters like Chauncey Gardiner and Walter Mitty. In 1979, the actor Peter Sellers played the character Chauncey Gardiner in the movie Being There, about a simple guy who worked as a gardener who was thrust out of the only home he ever knew when his employer passed away. After some chance encounters, Chauncey ends up in Washington, D.C., acting as an influential confidant to a political insider. Walter Mitty's character, played by Ben Stiller in the 2013 movie The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, is another super simple guy, living a dull life working for a failing magazine. But when his job is threatened, he embarks on a life of adventure across the globe. It's funny, when you look at the movie art for both films, the image is of a man seemingly doing the impossible, walking through the sky.
So how that relates to me is that's how I've been most of my life. I've done so many things I don't have the talent, the knowledge, or whatever to do extraordinarily well. And an example of that would be music. I really worked hard on music, but the highest level I ever reached is playing in Oktoberfest bands and things like that. Or in publishing, I did a lot of writing and saw myself as editor-in-chief of a major firm. And when I did get to that level in a firm, it was ridiculous. So these are examples of being somebody that I'm not necessarily, because I'm trying to find out who I am, and trying this and trying that, and I know I've got intelligence, I know I've got talents, but it took a long time to fit into what is my actual nature.
Really interesting. When did you start to think, I'd like to look for my biological relatives? Like, what was the catalyst for you that made you start thinking that this was something you wanted to do?
I'd always wanted to know, but I also knew that I would get an awful lot of resistance from mom, who felt, let me know in no uncertain terms that I was, I was not welcome to do that. This was, competing with her. Why wasn't I grateful enough? She was the actual mother, and it was, it was offensive for me to be looking out in those directions. But so all my life, I saw that there were no writers, no musicians in this, no priests. I have to tell you, growing up, I was given these options. Well, of course you're going to be a doctor, and if not that, well, maybe a lawyer, or maybe an entrepreneur or a businessman or something. You're definitely going to college, and I suppose that none of that works. I suppose you can be a priest, and nothing less than pope would be, acceptable here. But you could go in that direction.
Wow.
So,
That's some lofty
what's
goals.
yes, yes. Well, what's really interesting is the house is, I mean, our life is basically cultureless, and drab, and dry, and unnecessarily serious. And so my only joy growing up was church, because what did church have? Church had, it had color, it had rites and rituals and aromas, and ideas and controversy, and you name it. It was just full of life and color in many, many ways. So I was drawn very much in that direction. And even later, I got myself into a seminary when I was 12. So again, I'm looking for my people. Where are my people? And so, and the one culture I had to relate to was virtually, for, my dad's Irish background, and what he was. I was tired of being an outsider, and a kind of less than, by having been adopted. Ironically, I'm given great expectations, but on the other hand, let in on no secrets whatsoever, or ever engaging very much with relatives in any real meaningful way. And so without words having said it, or anyone said you are, well, people would say once, well, there's something wrong here, or, you're a little different. But I generally felt like an outsider. And that generation, and particularly my parents, the secrets were enormous. There must have been millions of them, but I was tired of the secrets. So that there had to be more. There had to be more, and I didn't really seek information until I was like in my 30s,
Wow.
and then did so.
Before you go further, I'd love to just press on some things that you said there, because I'm hearing what feels to me like a bit of a dichotomy. You were held as an outsider, but you also were given high expectations, which seems
Hmm.
counterintuitive to me. It would seem like if a person is held on the outside, they would also be held with low expectations, like you stay over there and don't bother trying to achieve anything because nobody cares, right? But it sounds like people had very high expectations for you. And I'm going to go back to something else you said. If people from the outside would look at you and think you were the golden child in your family. So there's a lot of what
Hmm.
seems to me, in listening to this for the first time, sort of contradictions, which I would imagine are confusing for you. Can you explain a little bit of what I've just asked about there in terms of high expectation held on the outside, but golden child as perceived from the outside?
Yeah, and I think it's because the the underlying choice of me was the backstory given to them by the adoption agency, about, well, this kid, look at where he comes from. He's got these great genes, all this success, all these brains, etc. You can't go wrong, kind of thing. And I think that's, the being that was bought, that was purchased. And that, I'm pretty smart. I'm certainly well above average in many ways, but I didn't fit their program. In other words, I'm more artistic than than scientific. I'm a lot less athletic than any parents would want. And so on and so forth. So yes, there were high expectations, and there was respect for the things to do and to learn, and some of the things that it seemed I would be able to do one day. But generally, my choices weren't good enough, not what they would have chosen. You know how it is in psychology. It's really strange when you have children. There'll be a child who's very much like you, and the next child won't be like you at all. And you just sort of have to love them and hope they turn out all right, even though you don't understand what it is they're doing or why they're doing it.
Right.
Does that help you?
Yeah, it does. That's an interesting set of experiences that you're talking about. The idea that a person could, it sounds like you were, for lack of better words, sold as being a certain kind of person, right? Here's this golden
Yes.
child, this great product that we have for you if you'll buy in, right? That's kind of what it
Right.
sounds like to me. Jack was told in no uncertain terms he would be disloyal if he searched for his birth family. He held off doing so until he was in his 30s. In his younger days, in the late 70s, Jack's curiosity led him to the local library to request documents about his background. Jack knew that the documents he would receive would have minimal information about his birth parents, but Jack held out hope that someone would send him his records, and whoever processed his request would miss some information during the redaction process and leave him a clue. Unfortunately, Jack had no such luck. A long time later, between marriages, Jack had a girlfriend who happened to be a private detective. At the same time, Jack's adoptive mother decided she wanted to share what she knew about Jack's birth family, and she knew a lot. Jack's birth father had been a contributing editor at Time Life in its early days. He went on to be the CEO of a major retail chain in Philadelphia and New York.
So I was able to find the name, and I had just got in there, and then suddenly there was this miracle that happened. And this is all the way back into the early 90s, by the way, and I'm 50 something. Anyway, the show, it's Unsolved Mysteries, had a thing about finding an infant in Arizona abandoned in the middle of the desert. That child was taken to an organization called Orphan Voyage in Scottsdale, which is no longer exists, by the way. But I called them just out of the blue. I mean, okay, here's somebody who knows stuff nobody else does. I can't tell you the surprise I had when they said, well, here's a number in California to call. The woman's name is Marilyn. I call Marilyn. She says, give me $350 and I'll have the names of both of your parents and where they came from in 10 minutes.
Wow. That's incredible.
And then I did find them. The birth mother was very hard to find. She had very unusual name. My birth father still was a little more difficult. It was quite a frequent name, but I did find them that way. And mom was she didn't really want me to meet my birth mother or birth father, but she was, and it turns out that she'd actually told my sister who parents were after everyone had passed away. She felt she had to do that, and I guess she was, giving me a clue. She must have been feeling bad about hiding everything.
Jack said his birth mother's name was very easy to find in the state of Wisconsin because it was so unique. He picked up a phone book and called the first family with that name. It was Jack's birth mother's brother who connected him with his birth mother. They wrote letters and shared pictures. Then, 6 months later, Jack and his birth mother had their first phone conversation.
She said if this had happened any time before, it probably wouldn't have happened. But now she was ready. Not only was she ready, she was extremely eager for this. And it was just absolutely wonderful. And then she and her husband and me and my daughter, we all met in Reno, Nevada for this glorious, glorious reunion. And she was number one of everyone, of all my biological people. She was just so loving. And I had 10 years to engage with her. And that's the greatest thing in the world. It was just
That's
wonderful.
really amazing. Wow. Can you tell me about that first meeting? What do you remember about it?
Well, first thing we do once we get through the elevator and into their hotel room is we remove our shoes to gaze at each other's feet, because her last memory of me holding me after I was born was to notice that my big toes curled up just like hers. And and it was true.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. The
We took
things
photos
we
and everything.
find to identify ourselves with our biology is hysterical, and that is really funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So what were those first few moments like, just being in front of this person that you've been wondering about, searching for? How was that?
Well, I can't remember a single thing we said because it was just, catching up on, all those years and just being glad for it. I mean, the one thing she was concerned about is she had five more boys, just with her husband. And it turns out the husband would have welcomed me too, but it was too late when she met him. And the boys were, had different levels of acceptance or non-acceptance. One of the things, by the way, I wish I had heard the podcast and read all these books before all this happened, or even during the time it happened, because then I'd realize how, you're lucky if somebody loves you and embraces you from coming out of the walls and the ceiling the way we do as adoptees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I wouldn't have felt so bad about those who, didn't care about me at all and were actually angry I was there.
Yeah.
So I would have been much more understanding. So the way it unfolded is you just had a lot of conversations with her, and then we set up a camping trip for me and the boys, soon later on, and there were probably a couple dozen trips between Arizona and Northern California where she was, and lots of interaction.
That is really cool. That's really fascinating. And tell me a little bit about the relationships with the brothers. I'm always fascinated. I don't have siblings in my reunion that I know of, and I know that it can be
Mhm.
challenging to come back as the oldest, especially for the person who was previously the oldest. All of a sudden, this new person has their title. What was it like to sort of try to engage with these guys?
Well, the one who was oldest, he insists it didn't bother him that he wasn't the oldest anymore. But I don't think that was entirely true. And in addition, I have to tell you, they're boys, right? And boys are boys. And if you want to be in any position in the family, after seeing those guys, I would have only wanted to be the oldest. I have to tell
That's
these boys,
funny.
they have a long history of, they love each other, but they also had plenty of disputes, and they have huge personality differences, the whole 9 yards. And it was just strange. Their upbringing was, nothing like mine, and vice versa. Very interesting family. No two are alike whatsoever. Entirely different careers, different, ways of living their lives. But to this day, by the way, they meet, once a year, and since their mother died, they're close in
Mhm.
that sense. And so a couple of them were extremely warm to me from the very beginning, and a couple of them were quite the opposite. And now more than ever, I realize when we step into folks' lives like that, we're tearing pillars down. We're reforming the universe, and it's rough on their hearts and their souls and their minds. And whatever empathy you can find, whatever commonalities you can find, you're grateful for. And on the other hand, they're just things that are, you know, you got. There's one, won't name any names, who, if he could put it into words, he would probably say, well, it's great we have this nice new older brother, but if we had to choose one, it wouldn't be you.
Wow. I'm sure you're not the first one to ever feel like that was the sentiment coming from a sibling. So that's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a lot of siblings too to come back to. Like, so you're not going to get a consensus probably across the board. There's a lot of varying opinions in a group of five. Jack and his brothers are all the same height, have the same eyes, and share similar temperaments. Jack went into reunion with his birth mother, knowing his birth father's identity, so he asked her about him. His birth mother opened up with all kinds of stories about the music they danced to and their life in the U.S. Navy, working at the same hospital. Jack heard all kinds of stories of the couple going on double dates with Jack's paternal grandfather, a surgeon at that same hospital.
It was a wild time during the war.
That's
And
great.
I know what songs they danced to. I know where they went. They had a lot of fun because the family had a lot of money on my birth father's side. So I had plenty of fun. And I even know where I was conceived. And I've even guessed, I'm guessing it was Thanksgiving weekend of 1944
Wow.
at the foot of Mount Baldy.
That is so funny. It's crazy how we were able to think back on the dates and go, oh, I bet it was right around here for you
Yeah.
figuring that out. Jack said his birth father's name was pretty common, but he was able to find the man. He drafted a well crafted letter intended to put the man at ease with the notion that Jack didn't want anything except to get to know him. Jack inserted pictures of himself and put together a whole package of information, hoping for the best when he sent it to an address in Philadelphia affiliated with the man. Nothing happened for a year. Then, one day out of the blue, Jack received an email from the man's daughter that simply said,
Hello, you might be my brother. Please reply.
Jack did reply to the email, explaining himself. The long-lost siblings got on the phone to chat. His half-sister explained it was a miracle that Jack's letter had ever gotten to her because the address Jack found was a rental home, and the daughter was only going there once in a long while to get mail and check on things. Unfortunately, Jack's birth father did not want contact with him.
It was a total wall. I mean, this is a family that really relishes its privacy and doesn't like to confess its sins or anything. And I have just concluded that he was, embarrassed about, being my father and was probably scared of his wife, literally. And so he just was not going to engage. And almost nobody in that family did or would. I've got a few more since then, but generally they pretty much saw it as a dark part of their history. And now this is a fascinating family, I have to tell you. And thank God for DNA and newspapers and everything else. I've got this family back to the before the American Revolution in Pennsylvania, and I know more about them than they've ever known about themselves.
Wow.
But it was good, and so the father was huge. He was CEO for two branches of Gimbels and Wanamaker. He just was awesome. He had his entire career. He was able to talk to at least one of his employees. He thought he was the bee's knees.
How did you
And
feel thinking through that, them perceiving things that way? What was that like for you?
well, the thing that I think many of us adoptees, probably most, if not all, what do we fear the most? We fear rejection. We hate rejection. Adoption, being born to a woman who relinquishes you, that's the first rejection. And then the fact that you're an outsider is a rejection. The fact that you don't get invited to be in the family business, that's a rejection. You find people who are your biological people who in your crazy subconscious should be welcoming you like the prodigal son. They're not. So how do I feel? I'm frustrated. I'm angry. This is one wish that cannot be fulfilled, to get together with them. On the other hand, I filled myself eventually full of, once I learned their stories and difficulties that they went through and the horrors they may have gone through with their own parents and so on and so forth. It's easy to forgive. It's easy to understand. Took a while, but it's everybody's got their own story, and it's worth spending the time trying to figure out where they're really coming from. And then sometimes there's things you learn, like actually in the end, I actually got the better deal. You
Really?
know,
Why do you say
and
that?
got the better deal in the sense that the parents who brought me up, sent me to college. As I mentioned, I think of all the men and all the families that my adoptive father was. He was, Saint Dad. He was just. Thank God, I knew that there are such people around. In the birth father's family, I've seen confessions of not feeling very much love in the family and things being sort of grim in many ways. So I mean, you can have shoulda, woulda, coulda things like if my birth mother had actually married my birth father's, every it'd be absolutely true. I probably would have gone to these schools that his family went to. It was one of the best college prep schools in the world, right there in Philadelphia, that he and his brother went to. He became the leader he was. That's something that could have happened, but didn't. But it's a waste of time to cry about it.
Yeah, that's right. It's not often time well spent to sort of reflect on what coulda, woulda, shoulda been, because you're here now, and quite literally the only way to go is forward. So, and this goes into something that I think you have expressed a feeling about, is like a lot of not so favorable feelings from a lot of adoptees. You want to talk a little bit about your feelings about how some adoptees feel?
Oh, boy, let me tell you, Damon, I'm really grateful for your type of show and the books that people have written because they're therapy about our feelings. We don't know we have the feelings, or if we don't know why we have them, and that's that foggy area. And so it's really hard to fight something that you don't know the root cause of. But then when you begin to realize that this is something experienced by a lot of people, that we can help each other at least get back to understanding, and then as a result of that start healing, forgiving, and building our own lives. So I don't know how to answer that exactly, except to tell you that my only advice to other adoptees would be to learn and get together when they can, like in these local adoptee groups, and then we are in charge of our lives and we can make changes. I certainly have in mind, as a result of this, I've just gone completely back to my own childhood about what I really cared about, and that those things were valid, and that I have nothing to apologize for or to feel weird about. Just a child, you can't express yourself, and even because you're an adoptee, you don't know why a lot of this stuff's happened, and it's only after going through this process that you, thank God I've lived long enough to see, why what makes sense and what doesn't.
You mentioned feeling sort of frustration and anger and things, having some emotions about the secondary rejection you experienced on your paternal side. But I guess I'm curious, how did you get over that? And what do you recommend to other adoptees for who are feeling something similar?
Okay, well, thank God for DNA and everything that we've learned. And now we go on ancestry.com and we get our matches, and it verifies, and it adds extra information. But boy, I'll tell you, it just brings the whole world to life for you. So you don't get to meet them. Well, you can't meet all the dead people anyway. Yeah, okay, you can't meet the people that are still living, fine, whatever. But what you get from them is a great feeling of connection to history. Suddenly, the history in Pennsylvania and Virginia and such places where they've become really alive, when your people have been there. They were there before the revolution, during the revolution, during the Civil War, and then it turns out there are threads that there's a really strong religious thread through these families all the way up to me. I am, it's sort of an intuitive, universally connected thing that is not left this strain of people. There's an opposite side too. We're all really full of ourselves.
Right.
These people are infamous for being full of themselves, and whereas the other side, the Polish side, they're quite humble, actually. Almost all of them. They're just extremely hardworking and and reliable, dependable, and you get to see all of that in the DNA and the history, and it turns out I'm sort of I'm the guy doing all the writing, and doing the person who's creating this legacy for them and for their great grandchildren and so on both sides of the family. So I have sort of a new vocation at this end, to be helping them pass on information.
No, that's the power of ancestry and the DNA tests. And you're right, it can help you to peek into the past while trying to look forward. It's funny how adoptees end up being the family historians in many ways because we're on such a search for all of this information. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, really wild. One of the things that you wrote down that I'm kind of curious about is you said something along the lines of having regrets about pieces of your search. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, and it's really based on not knowing what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You get back to, what we have available to us now, or even if it was back then, what questions could we have asked? Could we have made it easier for the biological people that we are meeting, or even for adopted family who are, paranoid about you going out and seeking your birth parents, how to talk, what works, what their interests are. There's so many things you can whine about. You can whine, your adopted parents weren't, affectionate enough, or, not enough into you as they were into their biological people. Or you could go to your birth mother, and you could see that you could decide that she was extremely selfish in what she did. She didn't have to do it. You could just point fingers at the adoption agencies, and call them, money grubbers if you want to. Or there's just so many ways. But then when you really look at, of all the horrible things that everybody have to face, in society, and peer pressure, different religious points of view, different political point of views, ages, cultures, the whole 9 yards. If we're more informed, it's easier to, to work from a standpoint of understanding rather than anger. And that's what I regret. I wish I had been more understanding all along, and more looking into how everyone that is part of this formula is affected by, my forcing myself on that.
But do you really consider yourself to have forced yourself on people?
Oh, darn straight. My whole thing here is my history is my history, and I have the right to know everything. And I mean, I'll tell you one regret in that line. If I had repeated this thing, I'd been turned down several ways by my birth father, and they were living in Naples, Florida at the time. And at the time, I didn't have much money, and so on. So that was kind of my excuse. But if I had done that again, I would have just flown there, found him alone somewhere on a dock where he's fishing, sat down, and even if 2 minutes later he chased me away or whatever, at least I could have seen him, heard his voice, and smelled him for a minute. I really felt I needed to do that, and I would now do that. I don't care who you are.
You would go there for sure.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, Jack, this has been amazing. I'm always interested to hear the stories of adopted people who launched a search in pre-internet days, because it speaks to the drive that we have to try to accomplish the goal, right? In the absence of solid information, we're willing to go to all kinds of great lengths to try to locate where our biology lives. And it's always interesting to me, too, to hear the differences in how a person is received in your biological mother's family. It sounded like you were welcomed, at least by her and by some of her kids. And then in your biological father's family, like, only one sister reached out and the rest of the family doesn't want to engage. And so it's just, it's a fair warning to everybody out there who's searching, is that you've got a lot of different possibilities for how this thing could go, and you can't really predict it. So I appreciate your courage in pursuing this. This is really fascinating to hear.
Well, Damon, let me just piggyback on that by telling absolutely everyone who's wondering, even if these block walls come up and it feels like nothing but the worst kind of rejection, the journey is still worth it, just based on what you learn around it, and having participated in it. It changes your soul. It's worth it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And one of the things that I've often told people is you don't realize how much you needed it until you start to get pieces of it. And then it's indescribable almost to some extent before you start to put the pieces together. And then as it starts to make you whole, you didn't realize what was missing, because now you feel that wholeness. It's fascinating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very well put.
Thank you. Well, Jack, thanks so much for being here with me, man. I really appreciate it. It was good talking to you, okay?
Well, it's an honor to be talking to you, my friend. Keep doing what you're doing. You're providing a wonderful service to people all over the world, Damon.
Thank you, man. It's my pleasure. And it's because of people like you. I couldn't do this if people like you didn't step forward and tell your story. So I'm always thankful for guests like you. You take care, Jack, okay?
All right, you too, Damon.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye-bye. Hey, it's me. Jack said some pretty powerful things there about his desire to at least see his birth father, meet him, and be in contact even if only for a few minutes. I thought it was a powerful testament to what adoptees feel about wanting to be acknowledged, let alone accepted. His life started out as the golden child in his adoptive family, at least by outward appearances. Jack was clearly told it would be disloyal to locate his birth mother, but when he did so anyway, he was finally greeted into her family and loved from head to toe. The desire to reunite is a powerful one, and Jack said the journey is well worth it. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you found something in Jack's journey that inspired you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn, who am I, really?